Welcome to the Transformations Podcast. Here, guests and I will share our transformative experiences and will explore how to find excellence in life. Hey, Dean Franco, welcome to the podcast. So happy to have you on.
Hey, thanks, guys. I'm H&H, humbled and honored. So.
H&H, love it. So, Dean, most people know you in through the Filipino martial arts. Especially from your podcast, which FMA Discussions, which I think is the longest running FMA podcast. Would that be correct?
I think FMA Pulse has done interviews. However, they mostly cover techniques and such. So if they could have maybe before us, however, we are just solely dedicated to interviewing and not so much, capturing somebody's techniques or a short 20-minute thing on what they're doing based on their style and all that. So far as podcasts are concerned, that might be accurate.
So before we get into the podcast a little more, I'd like to hear about what got you interested in martial arts generally. When did you start martial arts, and what was it that triggered your interest in studying a martial art?
So when I was in grade school, I did a Judo program that didn't last long because of the enrollment. And then my next stop from there was Taekwondo. So I stuck with that on and off all the way up to mid-90s until I saw the first UFC. And I wanted to check that out and that. So grade school, interruption. The class ended, got back into it, teens, and then continued with the Taekwondo up until, again, the mid-90s. And from there, segued basically into JKD and, of course, heavy dose of FMA. And the status quo, pretty much FMA.
So when you decided to go into Taekwondo, you were probably at an age, I'm thinking, based on the level of school that you were in, where you could choose maybe where you wanted to go if there were some kind of selection of schools around them. I also came out of Taekwondo, and it's something I wanted to do for the kicks and everything else. Why did you select that school, or was it just the dojang that happened to be closest by?
It really was that. It's not like, again, I had this huge selection. That was far from the case. Very few, actually. So it was more just kind of first see in there. I mean, it wasn't like, wow, I got 10 to choose from here, that was not the case.
Now, where did you grow up?
So grew up in, Connecticut my whole life. So a town called New Milford, and then eventually moved up to Northwest Corner area, which I'm currently in now. So, but Connecticut, all the years.
So now you saw the UFC, and I can imagine, like all of us, we see these guys going out and super rough and tumble. But in the early days, they weren't as skilled as they are now. The sport has really evolved and the training has evolved. But you're like, geez, those guys are hitting pretty hard, and we do this point sparring. I wonder if my stuff's going to hold up. Did you have those kind of thoughts, which took you out of Taekwondo and into JKD?
Yeah. So, it's funny. Yeah, definitely. I probably couldn't articulate that the way you did back then, but I knew what I was seeing. It was different, and I wanted some exposure to it. I wanted to try it out. So Ron Kozakowski, as we both know, Connecticut, was the first school that, quote unquote, back then, I guess could be construed as the eclectics. I mean, he was running not MMA at the time, but a BJJ. Of course, he had JKD through Paul Vunak and Larry Hartzell. So when I went down there, I was seeking I want to kind of see if he's offering what I just saw in this, live on TV, this UFC stuff. But through that is really where I saw my first, I didn't even hear of Filipino martial arts, to be honest, before that. But that's where I first saw, of course, JKD, UFC, and some of the ground, even though it wasn't coined MMA there, but however, there was a separate striking, you had the ground, and etc.
Nice. Did you get into martial arts because there was some kind of bullying or something going on, or was more of an interest of, from watching movies back in the day, or the kung fu theater that was on the weekends? What sparked that interest for you?
I would say a combination of definitely just interested in what I was seeing, on TV, whether it was Bruce Lee's movies, or of course, Kung Fu, like you just mentioned on the Saturdays there. In a conjunction too, as I got older, I wanted to come more in my shell, and really martial arts, I have to say, brought that and gave me confidence. In other words, like what helped me kind of do the podcast, FMA discussion, and all that was, I mean, of course, definitely the vehicle of martial arts where instilled confidence in me and believing in myself. Without that, I don't even think I'd be here today, like talking to you.
So, how long were you in JKD before, or maybe you're still in JKD, before you started looking at FMA and really going in another direction again with your arts?
So, all right. So, my first exposure to JKD was to Ron, one of Ron's top students, who I'm still see, and that his name was Chris Smith. So, Chris Smith at that time opened up his own school. The hours, they just were better. So, I went over to Chris Smith. So, when you're under the ensemble blend via direct under Dan, or in this case, I was under the Vunak lineage. When you get your diploma, you're getting it in JKD, John Fan, and of course you're getting in the FMA. So that's kind of the journey. So I received both of them. Where at that time we're apprentices, eventually associates. So I kept going with JKD, but I don't want to say I just put it on the shelf and just didn't bother with it anymore. However, though, I really went heavily into FMA. So in other words, going from Anasana blend, segue into Sayoc, Atienza, a good chunk of Doce Paris. I just never shared that with folks, but really went deep into that. And then all the way to Burton, Abenir, KI, Lameco, into what present day.
Oh, nice. And what is it about FMA? Like, where did you get your exposure? Like a deeper exposure? I know I fell in love with FMA after reading Guro Dan's book, and just that section on the teachers in the back, and the story about Angel Caballas beating up some guys in Alaska, and he's just this little guy with a cigarette and a big bony knuckle on his wrist. And I'm like, man, I got to go train with this guy, and luckily I was able to do that. It's like, so that book was like, oh, this is what I need, and then stories of Remy Presas in the magazines, and of course Juni Cañete and other stories that were just so fascinating. And then you get into the style, and it was just so much stuff and free flowing and moving that I never had in the empty hand arts. It was like mind blowing to me. You felt like I felt like I was coming alive in it. So what is it about the arts for you that really grabbed your interest and got you to focus there?
A lot of what you mentioned, it brought out this, as you just mentioned, this aliveness, like this reincarnation, if you will, of interest, motivation, excitement, and I have to say, nothing's really moved me, even to present day, like FMA does. Um, I mean, I really enjoy Sulite. I really do, from the hand perspective. I really, really do. However, though, nothing just moves me like FMA, and brings out self creativity, imagination, wanting to be the best version of myself, give the best version of my students, and you have a huge part to do with this. Because when I got your book in 97 or somewhere around there, oh my God, I was so jealous of you, because here's this young kid over in the Philippines seeing all these guys and training with these guys. And I'm reading this, and there's two people that stuck out to me. And one of them, of course. The second one was who I thought was the JKD of FMA, Edgar Sulite. When I was reading what he was doing, because I was in JKD then, And when I'm reading what he was doing, I'm like, he's taking these systems,
Right.
extracting, putting together. I'm like, this guy's the JKD of FMA. And of course, Ilustrisimo, the other, as you knew. But it was your book
Right. Right.
that perpetuated me wanting to not go outside of Anasano blend and all that, because that's what led me to Sayoc and all that. When I started seeing all these different styles. So it's your fault.
It's my fault. Yeah. I'll take the blame. I'll take the blame. So, Tatang, for me, when people ask me who are the best guys out there, in my opinion, doesn't mean other people agree. I always say, like, with all due respect to all of the masters, that Tatang was like Yoda, and then like Angel Cabales and Inosano and the other are all Luke Skywalker, right? Like, a lot of masters reach a super super good level, but then there was just one guy for me that was Tatang, was just above them, right? And in my opinion, and I wonder if what you're, and when Tatang moves, he looks kind of awkward if you don't know what he's doing, right? He doesn't look smooth, like he's flowing. It's like chop, kill, chop, stop, chop, kill. It's kind of interesting. What are your impressions of him that grabbed you, or from the book, and then watching him online?
It's so funny because a couple people have asked me that question. And so when I was going through reading the individual chapters on the grandmasters that you chose to cover, like, just read it, just stood out. Like, he just stood out. It wasn't like, oh man, him, or I mean, just clearly there. And in conjunction with that, YouTube, of course, was coming out at the same time, right? And then, so I got to actually see like live footage. So the parallel between how you covered him and reading about him and watching him on YouTube now, way back then, I couldn't tell you what he was doing. All I know is I was just immersed, like, what I was seeing. I wanted it. I appreciate what I was seeing, even though I couldn't tell you that he was doing the flowing step. He was doing Arco and all that. But I knew what I saw. I was loving it in there. And much to your point, like, I remember when you came on the episode, you made that analogy, like he's Yoda, everybody else were like, just, like, we're the Jedis. You know what I mean? I thought that was really neat and clever, right, when you made that analogy, and that resonated with a lot of people when you mentioned that on the show. But he just special. I mean, and again, much to your point, obviously tremendous respect for everybody else that was covering that book, 100%. But there was just, even for me, not having the knowledge or the background, like, for instance, like you being out there, I just knew he was special from afar.
And for the people listening, the book is what was the title of the book that you're referring to?
That book is probably my all-time favorite.
It's so favorite you can't find it. It's under your car tire, keeping you from rolling down the hill. Oh, you got the original Filipino martial culture. So you have the original edition. So a revised edition came out with a different cover after that, which had about 30 or 40 typos and spellings corrected. And I think I was able to add another 4 or 5 or 6 photos to fill in blank space.
I was under
on the new one. So Haji Yasir Tanajalan's in it.
Okay. I definitely got to get that.
That's the original, yeah. Yep.
This book, anyhow.
Yeah. And then I'm trying to get the rights back from the publisher because I want to fix a couple of things in there and add some more teachers and blow it up if I can. So Edgar Sulite is very interesting because, he was originally a disciple of Leo Gahe. He was a Mikiti Tertia guy. And then he became a disciple of Caballero, right? And then he was going to do a fight with Yuli Romo, and he met Tatang, and it's like a pretty interesting thing. And then what a lot of people don't know is that Alex Coe, the late Gocho Grandmaster, gave him the money and sent him on his trips to write his book, The Masters of Arnis. He paid all of his bus fares, the food, the fees. He bought the film, developed it, and printed the book.
Mm-hmm.
He did it all for Edgar because he and Super Ricketts and Edgar, and Yuli all became tight friends. Tony, Diego, at that time, and Edgar really was special. He really was able to combine those styles in a way and create his own Lameco style, where a lot of people do a lot of styles and they just add everything. Edgar knew where the balance was, and I think he really created a nice system that is lasting until today.
Yeah, no argument. He again, like those two really stood out in your book. And again, no disrespect to other. I mean, just tremendous coverage on the other masters that you spoke on. But yeah, he just really caught my eye again. Like the five major systems and then the subsystems, and I'm reading this and that I'm like, man, this guy is Bruce Lee of FMA. He's like what he did, and the problem was being on the East Coast. There just wasn't a lot of exposure to Lameco KI, heavily modernese and in a sound blend. Particularly when I speak in, as far as Connecticut is concerned, we didn't have those, so we kind of unfortunately lost out because had I, had the opportunity to, I would have certainly took it, if they were close by, for instance, like, New York but just few and far between, just tough to find guys that were teaching that. But those two really, really resonated with me and still to this day, as far as the systems are concerned.
Yeah. So when you decided, especially with YouTube, I mean, that gave everyone exposure to everything that they had seen in a book or magazine or never even heard of before. YouTube really gave us an eye into every style and every teacher. I mean, that we hadn't had previously. And you had mentioned Burton Richardson, you mentioned Bong Abner, you didn't mention, but we'll mention the young Jedi, Brandon Ricketts. When you decided you wanted to jump into Ilustrisimo style, or Lameco, who did you decide to reach out to do that, and how?
So the KI was a little before Lameco. So I was just trying to find anybody really. I mean, again, coming from Connecticut, it's just tough because there was just no reps there and what have you. So I was under Burton already, and Burton always knew I had this fascination and deep appreciation and love for KI. So finally he said, hey, if you want, I can start training you in it. And I'm like, great. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. I would love that opportunity. So that was really, now in conjunction with that, I had been training, of course, in Abenir. I was seeing Marvin Mendoza in Chicago, going out to see him. And of course, as everybody well knows, Abenir is heavily KI influence. All the sword work is KI. So when I started to train with Burton, I definitely had like a good nucleus of foundational pieces from Marvin with through the lens of Abenir colleagues. So a little fast forward from there, I started training with David Gould. I started getting Edgar's insight. So I was getting Burton's insight more from Ricketts, Diego aspect, and of course the great one, because when Burton went over there, he was still alive. Abenir lens, the Lameco lens kind of through Guru David Gould. Then Young Jedi, Brandon Ricketts. I started really training with him heavily. And then Yuli Romo and all that. So I made a concerted effort to really just see everyone else's approach. And I can tell you, it's paid dividends to really see like what they do, why they do it, some nuances, some of the subtle differences, their approach. Do they emphasize the engano? Or is it more like they're looking at defensive movements, just throwing a few things out there. And that. So that's pretty much the KI. So present day, of course, Guru Brandon. Burton starting his own program up, I guess, which I think he should. I think we need more people to bring this out. I mean, unfortunately, some of these arts are going to die. And the next one, going to talk about,
Yeah.
unfortunately, I don't have a good feeling in 2 decades from now, which is Lameco. I don't see it being actively perpetuated. I don't see, besides
Right.
Roger and maybe a few others, it's just not being taught, which is, I think, is sad in there. So Lameco, of course, really through David Gould, and I done a lot of online, stuff like that. His group classes, Rogers, and then Roger's student Stephanie. But yeah, much to your point, I think Lameco's
Roger Agbulos.
yes, yes, yes. I think who I guess is doing a lot better now. So God bless. Um, but I think Lameco is really special. The way they divide the blunt versus the edge, and where he pulled from as far as curriculum for that. I just think it's a really special system, and I think it's just sad that it might just get fall by the wayside.
Yeah. Tambuli Media published David Gould's book on Lameco Eskrima, and in there are inputs from other Lameco teachers and their background. So I would like to suggest to people who are interested in Edgar and Lameco to please check that out. Um, One thing that's very noticeable in martial arts is that, well, there's two things I want to say. One, with generally speaking, is that when the grandmaster passes away, the art tends to splash out, right, and go from a deep pool to a thin puddle that's really wide, because Ed Parker passed away, and now there's hardly any Ed Parker Kempo schools, and Parker Kempo people aren't. They wanted to be with Ed Parker because he was such a larger than life figure, right? I mean, he was so good at what he did, and then his guys were so good, and then he passes away, and now there's so many organizations and it splits. Angel Caballas was such a larger than life figure. People wanted to be associated with him and his Serrata, and then he passed away. Things split and spread apart. Edgar Sulite was around. Everybody wanted to be with Edgar. When Edgar passed away, it split us down, and now we see like there's hardly teachers going to be around, and we see this. I studied with a teacher, Herminio Viñas and Jose Viñas, and that style is almost non-existent anymore, especially outside of Bacolod. And I studied with his son Wilson Viñas, and it's almost non-existent. It's like the headmaster is what pulls people in. When they die, it's everybody goes their own way. It's pretty sad unless there's a big association, like with Taekwondo through the government or something else. Um, and and we see that. And the thing with FMA that's different from everything else, which means things things separate faster. Not saying they're worse; they're just not connected to the source. Is that it's such a unique art that, in a way, that your own expression is what comes forward, and your own understanding is what comes forward. So when Tatang passed away, then there was the Bakbakan Kali came out, and then Tony wanted the Repetición Original, and then Pedro went off in his way and said he had three other teachers, when really the whole time I knew him, he only had Tatang, and then he had his own thing. And like a lot of, I jumped out of using the name because there's too many politics, and I also had other teachers, so I have my integrated Eskrima, and I think, but Angel had more than one teacher, and Ilustrisimo had more than one influence, and all these guys. So it's like it's almost like it's the art for you, and you know there's no reason pushing you to stay under one person's umbrella, because we all think it's like with music. Everybody plays music differently. Even Beethoven, everybody who plays it differently. But they don't name their method of playing. But martial artists want to name our thing, because I think there's an arrogance part to that as well.
That's a good point. Yeah,
myself included.
Yeah, at least you. No, it's a good point. Like, obviously by the lens of the show, the vehicle of the show. I mean, I've got pretty deep in some of these systems by coverage, and you get some of the back end information that you don't make public, and so forth and so on. And so it's kind of sad that people, they think that you need to be under just one faction, or this is the faction that you should be. Like that upsets me, because if anybody who's touched hands with a great one,
Yeah.
they're going to have something to offer. You know what I mean? If they were in front of him, exposed to him, and that, whether it was 10 years, it was 6 months, or what have you. And to me, you're only benefiting yourself and your personal journey to expose yourself to everybody who, touched hands with them and get their expression, or maybe what they saw as far as subtleties or nuances. And to me, I don't know why you would rob your journey of that. And then furthermore, why you would put yourself in indentured servitude, if you will, like, or the pressure being placed upon you that you shouldn't go train anywhere else, all that. To me, the student, and I mentioned this on the show so much, the student is the most important part of the journey. It's not the instructor or the system. And sometimes I think that gets lost in translation. You know what I mean? Now, if you're happy just staying in one place, and that's okay, well, that's great too. There's nothing wrong with that. Whatever, I guess, makes you happy. But also, much to your point, yeah, like Lameco is going to be in trouble. Like, Felix unfortunately just passed. Bud Balani unfortunately just passed. And so when I look at active people who are teaching it, it's Roger's getting back. Roger's student Stephanie Heil, they teach it. Guro Dave, but just a very small pocket with Guro Dave in Mississippi. No reps really actively. I mean, it's sad. Like, it's going to, and it's such this great system, and nobody. Yeah, I agree with you. Their systems are dying out, and they're going to continue to die out, sadly.
Yeah, it's a hard thing. But that's a good segue into our next piece of discussion about the FMA discussions. What made you want to start the podcast? If I recall, you had told me at one point that it started in late October 2019.
Yeah.
What made you decide to do that? To get on and start a podcast?
Yeah. So, okay, here's what happened. Late fall, actually late October 2019, what was pre-COVID. Who would think we would say, pre-COVID? So what happened was, Bert suggested to Dwight Woods, hey, you should interview Dean, what he's doing from a JKD approach, teaching kids FMA. And so Dwight brought me on. That was the summer of 2019. Guru Burton Richardson suggested to Seafood Dwight Woods that I come on his podcast. And so Seafood Dwight was gracious enough to bring me on. And it was a wonderful experience. But I tell you, what really captivated me was I immediately got to thinking, hey, he's doing this incredible coverage of Jeet Kune Do, and he does it very well, very, very well. And I'm like, there's nobody doing this for FMA. And so I got to thinking, and I'm like, how neat would it be to give opportunity for people to be heard, whether they're big names or not, that maybe perhaps never got the opportunity to be heard. And that's how I kind of looked at myself when I was given the opportunity with Seafood Dwight. Like, who the heck was I? And so I wanted to afford that to other folks who maybe never been afforded that opportunity. So with all due respect, I approached Seafood Dwight Woods and I say, look, I feel compelled to, bring this up to you and get your blessing, because I consider you the first one to do this right on, Facebook. I said, I would like to do it for FMA. He was fine with it. And then I started. So a couple hiccups in the beginning. So to get acclimated, I just interviewed my teachers first. So Bong Abenir, Tom Sosa was the first one. I think Bong Abenir was the second. I did another one with Tom, just to kind of get my feet wet going, and that. And so the reason, again, get my feet, but also I wanted to give my instructors, like, hey, let me bring these guys on who afforded me this, and kind of some payback, if you will, in there. And, when I was doing it, I really saw the void. In other words, like, there's a void here of getting FMA practitioners, not just, not just the big names. Sometimes you need the big names for momentum. I can get into that later. But I really wanted to cover folks that didn't have necessarily big names, but had something to offer. I thought they were doing is special. Definitely female instructors. I want to get a strong presence, a female voice, and so it was really I did it. I thought I would really enjoy giving people to be heard there. Also, I saw the void in the FMA community where nobody was really covering. There was no coverage really, and so really it was really a combination of those two: one, affording folks opportunity; two, the void.
How do you figure in your head that? So this is a question for all new podcasters out there. How do you figure out in your head, like, okay, I want to start a podcast. I'm going to have, after my instructors are on, people who aren't well known, maybe people who don't know them at all. And how do you feel like you can build an audience with that? And you have built an audience. I mean, so how did that audience? So at some point, where was that tipping point where you really started, the audience really started coming on to hear FMA opinions and stories from people that nobody knew? I mean, that's really courageous.
Yeah, it's funny. When I look back, it's kind of surreal because, and the reason being for a few reasons. One, it's not like I was experienced and knew what I was doing. I was just like, my first question, of course, was like, is anybody going to listen to me? So I think one of the turning points was forming the group. So in other words, the first 4 or 5 episodes, they were on YouTube, but I didn't have a correlating group to it. So when I formed the group, FMA Discussion, the group started to grow because not only I was using as a library source in a post, not only whatever interviews I just did, but hey, up and coming next, So that, and then folks just started coming in because I set a very tone in that group that this is not going to be allowed. It's not. I don't care, how other people run their groups and forums. There's not going to be any name calling, swearing. So I bring that up, even though it's contextually different from the actual podcast. And this is just feedback that I've gotten. I think people saw the integrity in me and the honesty in my approach of how this is the way I'm going to run my group, and they saw consistency and the way I did interviews. And again, I'm just picking back up what feedback of people have given me. I think also people really appreciated the fact that, like, wow, he's just not going for the big names. He's giving other people a chance to be heard. And I really do. I think there was such a void, GM Mark. I really do, that I really think that resonated with the people. Like, there was just no coverage. And there's like, oh, wow, this guy's going to cover FMA and all that. So I think the combination of all, one, what they saw in me and my approach, no ego, not rough around the edges. What you see is kind of what you get. The void, of course, the correlating group. And it kind of, it was a slow start, but don't get me wrong, it was a slow start. I mean, I really had to, get it going and all that. But you know what it was? I was just consistent. If there's anything that I could allude to as far as October 2019 to present day, I think it was just consistent,
Yeah. In the podcast before this one, my guest was Coach Kevin Kearns from Rhode Island. He's actually from Boston, but he's currently in Rhode Island. And one of his things is that without consistency, you have nothing. Consistency in your business, consistency in your workouts, consistency in your whatever you're doing in life, and you're bringing it home here again. That even when there's hardly any viewers or listeners, you got to stay the path. Just like in martial arts training, you suck at some stuff for a while, then you just want to practice the stuff you're really good at, and then you just got to stay consistent, and then there's a tipping point, right? Mm-hmm. And one thing I'd like to add to what people are saying is that I look at you as a very humble and genuine person. A student of mine said, "Oh, you should go on Dean Franco's podcast. And I was like, he probably doesn't want to have me on. And, he's got all these other guys on there. I'm old hat, whatever. And I don't know. I've been hammered so much over the years. I just didn't want to do it publicly. But then I did it, and I found out you were like the greatest guy ever. So you and Elric Jundas, the two greatest guys ever, And,
Well, I appreciate that. And you know what?
So when you said you formed a group, yeah. No, go ahead.
Oh, no. I just want to piggyback on what you're saying. Like, I was so humbled and honored when you came on. There's some folks, and they're going to come on. It's going to be a home run. And for various reasons. One, their history, their accomplishments. And the reason why I was so happy that you came on, because you really paved the way for me by your book. Like, if it wasn't for your book, I don't know, like, if I would be where I am today, as far as my journey, my knowledge, my continuation, for all this. So I attribute your book. So I was so happy when you decided to come on. I was really reluctant to ask you because big name, been there, done it. Why am I going to go on Dean Franco show? Who's he?
Oh my gosh. Well, this shows how perceptions and reality are so different. If we talk about human nature for a minute, I perceived your show and you as someone like, why is he going to bother with me? It's all these new guys out there. I'm out of the loop, on the new stuff that's happened. And you're sitting there saying, oh my God, this is the guy who paved the way. And, and it's like from both the opposite ends, our perception was different than the reality is. We just wanted to talk. And this is how that poor communication, I think, leads to a lot of problems in life, especially in martial arts. And I'm glad it worked out. Yeah. So you said you formed your group, and that's when things really started to become cohesive. How did you form that? Was it on Facebook? Was it on your podcasting platform? How did you start this group, and then how did you get people to come in and interact and join the group?
So I formed the group probably, I want to say probably December or very early 2020. And I formed on Facebook. And so, of course, it's still there. So, and basically, initially, I just invited people I knew. I figured I'll get some people, and the people I knew were basically my students, training partners, all that. So I just invited, folks that I knew. And, but at the same time, I was putting in there the interviews that I had done already. So it was serving as a library. It was serving as a mode of like, hey, this is a group in conjunction with a podcast I do called FMA Discussion. It also enabled me to have a central location to advertise up and coming events, the podcast. And I also told folks, hey, look, when you come here, please tell us your background. I use this as a barometer, if you will, to choose to interview people. Please also don't hesitate to post your events in here and all that. So I made it very open for everybody to share their content in there, to share their up and coming events, to post their videos. I just, that. Now, mind you, I didn't have any rules then because I was under the impression people will just act accordingly. They'll just be professional, So come 3,000 members or so, I'm by myself. I don't have any help. I'm doing everything on my own. And I'm like, this is starting to get like the Wild West. So I had to get my hands in there. I came up with rules. I grabbed a couple moderators to help. And so it was rocky then. But ever since then that I really, input those, the rules and stay consistent with following them and all that, it's been kind of self-governing, autopilot. Every once in a while we have to get in there. But generally speaking, with 12-something thousand members in there, not that all 12,000 participate, of course, but with that number, it's pretty self-governing and all that, because people know. Matter of fact, people have often referenced it in there. It's like, hey, FMA Discussion is a place where you can go, you can voice your opinion and not get attacked or ridiculed and all that, because I won't stand for it. Like, hey, we don't have to agree with one another, but nobody's going to get attacked
Right.
because they express themselves, in there. And I stay, and again, like you mentioned with the gentleman there in Rhode Island, just being consistent, and on both fronts, the interview front and there. In other words, recently we had a breakdown FMA discussion with somebody, and what I was telling him was, hey, look, we can't act one way in the group and act another way on the show. I go, what made us the lens that people see us for, or the admiration and appreciation people see us, because they see this consistency, how we conduct ourselves in a group, how we conduct ourselves in interviews. I go, I'm not changing that. It's been a working formula.
Yeah. I wondered how you keep people when they're talking on the podcast, and I think yours go live on Facebook, right? I mean, you're recording live, and people are chiming in, and like, how do you? I pre-record mine now because there's so much. I tend to get long-winded, and I want to cut a lot of what I say out because people want to hear what the guest has to say, and then sometimes the guests are saying things that I just don't want to be negative. I don't want any negativity, just excellence in life for everyone. But you're running live, and how do you just? I mean, that's trusting. How do you just keep that from breaking down? And like you're saying, I think most of your 421 episodes didn't break down because the consistency of the kind of rules that you set. But you've had maybe one or a few that did break down. Is that what you're saying?
Not as far as the episodes, as far as like in the group and all that. No, the episodes, knock on wood, have been very now.
Okay.
So here are the rules when you come in as a guest, and again, that consistency. In other words, they see how we don't allow posts to come in talking negatively about somebody or a person. That post gets immediately removed if it erroneously even got approved in the first place. Okay. All right. So generally, it doesn't even get approved. So
right.
So in other words, if you come on a show and you're starting to blast somebody or system, no. So they see how we conduct ourselves in a group and how we're not going to allow you to just come on my show and you're going to start blasting somebody, a person or a system. So they see that what's modeled here in the group is also modeled here. Now, as far as the running live, yeah, I ran live since day one. The first few episodes, Facebook had a guest option. You could write there. However, they removed that, hence went to be live. And some folks use StreamYard or what have you. But yeah, everyone's been
right.
live. The audience generally likes it because they can make comments or submit questions on the comment section on the right hand side. Again, when the questions come in, they know, like, don't ask something that's going to bring up something negative or shed, negativity on something and all that. They just, again, that consistency, like, this is going to be the fourth year of me doing this, and they just know, like, there's a certain way that Dean does things. And Dean is not going to tolerate this. He's not going to venture into this lane, So that kind of, yeah. So I guess those who like drama, I'm probably boring to them,
Yeah. I find you quite boring. But no.
See?
Oh my goodness. So you had 421 podcast episodes, and I would like to say, what are some of the more? There has to be a few that just stick out as memorable.
Yeah.
For various reasons. Could you name a couple that either the guest or the topic matter?
Yeah. Absolutely.
That have been most memorable for you.
Well, two of you are right here. I mean, Alric's on the Spanish colonization. Just killed it. I mean, folks. I mean, it was so interesting.
Elric Jundes.
Yeah, it was so right. It was so educational. I learned a lot just during that interview, and that's another thing too. I'm definitely going to continue to answer your question. These episodes have been such a learning curve for me. You know what I mean? Like, I have actually learned a lot by virtue of interviewing all these different people. So my understanding on different systems now is so much more enhanced by virtue of these interviews. And I mention that because, Elric's episode on the Spanish colonization, all that, it was two parts, was incredibly informational and educational. Your episode was huge. I really enjoy that because of what actually hearing from you, your journey through going over there and then coming back to Philadelphia, your minor and niche, Venice, and then of course the great one. That was, what else? Here's this guy who, for most parts, nobody's ever heard of. Young, low key, kind of underground, but was such a phenomenon. In my opinion, was such an interesting.
Can you repeat his name again?
Yes, Nino. Okay, so Nino Rabang, but it was so fascinating, down to earth. It was one of my best episodes in that profound. What he was speaking on, and just to this day still stands out. And there's an example of a guy that nobody really knows, but incredible offerings, as far as talking to him intellectually,
right.
It's stimulating in that. Maya Solderum, that was a really good episode. Kelly Warden, kind of straight shooter, you know what I mean? But yet there's a profound aspect in him when he talks about certain things. You can see how he has such an incredible heart, you know what I mean? Even though you might come across, kind of a duality within him. He's special, Kelly Warden.
Right.
Maya, again, I mentioned her. The theme episodes. So in other words, okay, so I do interviews where we look at your bio, we get your background, what you're doing, what got you here, your future plans and all that. But then we would do what we call our theme episodes, meaning to keep us kind of reinventing myself. I came up with theme episodes where we would focus on a particular theme within FMA. And those are doing really well. And those I enjoy because you can really dial in on a subject matter. And if you get good guests that are fairly knowledgeable within that subject matter, they really make for good shows. And one of them was, for instance, how to open up a successful FMA school, which is difficult. Those were really interesting. The KI theme episodes.
Wow.
I thought were, what came out of the
that was a good series.
Yeah, what came out of those KI theme episodes, in my opinion, was incredible. Was incredible. Some of the information that came out of that. So the theme episodes, all of them, in my opinion, because you're dialing in something and they're so informative and educational, where somebody could look at that and get a better understanding, pending what the subject matter was.
Mm-hmm. Do you find? Well, I just want to back up a second because Sonny Umpad's name was mentioned. Sonny Umpad is somebody who I was always intrigued by because I got his book, and then I saw it wasn't until later, till YouTube came out, that I saw some videos and was impressed. And I thought, here's a guy, that's the only FMA stylist that I didn't meet that I wanted to meet. Mm-hmm. Our paths never crossed. And it's too late, right? But when I look through everybody, anywhere, of any time that I would have wanted to meet, he's the only one that I didn't meet that I knew that I wanted to meet. Interestingly, but do you find for yourself that? Okay, let me put it this way: if somebody studies Chinese martial arts, right, no matter which style. Let's say just globally, you can choose an art that's like a fighting style, that's mainly techniques, and you can pick an internal art, right? Tai Chi, Bagua, which Luo Bafa, where there's an internal energy development, there's a spiritual, there's a mind-body connection, and a lot of Chinese martial arts, they have a cultural wrapping around them. Mm-hmm. And I know here in my gym, where I teach Kung Fu in our niece, that I have an altar for the Kung Fu thing, and I have the lion heads up on the wall, and we wear the uniforms, and for me, that's cultural and it becomes spiritual but not religious. But in FMA, we really don't have it because Philippines is 80% Catholic, right? So you don't have this kind of ritualistic stuff, but there's the Catholicism was a folk Catholicism, so it's Catholicism that was dropped on top of folk beliefs, oracion, anting, various animistic practices. So they've got their own thing there, but it doesn't have a lot of the wrappings that the Chinese stuff has. It's because it's application based and it's not ritual based, most of it. Do you find for you that there's a kind of that FMA brings you some kind of a spiritual center of some kind, however you might explain that? And I'm not talking about religion. I'm just talking about, you mentioned developing self-confidence. I think that's part of spirituality for yourself. You start with a rock of confidence and you build out. So how was that with you?
Yeah, I would definitely agree. As far as the spiritual aspect, FMA definitely having that. While like you mentioned, they might not have what as far as your examples in the Chinese martial arts there, but what FMA has done for me spiritually is, it's unprecedented. Again, confidence was mentioned, but that the whole aspect of wanting to be my best version of myself. Not just, and that's not just within the lens of like, okay, I want to be the best practitioner. But just a better human being overall. And I can attribute that to just FMA, like the discipline, how I conduct myself, how I want to be viewed, Like that's important to me. That's important. That's important for me, how my students view me. And to me, it all comes center to that spirituality. How I want to be perceived, my legacy, my work ethic, and there, just everything, overall lens in the community. But that I can honestly say, absolutely, all derived from that inner spirituality definitely from FMA.
I found for me that it wasn't until I was in FMA a few years that I felt confident enough that I could defend myself, because you're doing these free flow drills, you're being struck with weapons, there's daggers flying by, and then I actually was able to. It actually formed a center in me, right? Like a center of fortitude or something, where it's like, okay, now I know where in Wing Chun and Taekwondo and Kempo that I had studied, I still didn't have confidence in myself, right? Even though but FMA brought that to me, but not in a bullish way, because there's always the teachers who can beat you, but they were kind enough just to hit you hard enough, you know what I mean? To let you know. And so it's like that center for me came from FMA. And like you're saying, I agree, like our sense of self developed from there, of who we are and who we want people to think we are and how we conduct ourselves. The theme of this podcast is, and the title is, transformations. So I want to ask you, over your time in your life, number one is FMA. How has FMA transformed you from where you were and who you were before you studied, and where and who you were up to the podcast start, but not after?
Okay. Well, good question. It's funny. The transformation up until the podcast is like, I actually thought I knew more than I thought. It wasn't until it was, and again, piggybacking off how FMA Discussions been so educational by virtue of these interviews. So definitely thinking more, I knew more than I really did. Also, while my knowledge increased from inception of FMA Discussion to present day, my understanding overall of just Filipino martial arts has also greatly enhanced, and my physical application of the arts also has dramatically changed. And there, yeah, like I look back at, in other words, I look at my version of myself when I first started FMA. Okay, so you know, late late '90s. Okay, then I look from there to up to 2019. Okay, all right, some growth, and I thought there was growth, but now looking back, not really.
That's 20 years.
Yeah,
There's
that's what I
growth.
mean. There were some, but not as much as I thought there was. Right? Okay. FMA podcast 2019,
Right.
present day. I have more growth in these 4 years than I had in the 20 before that. 5 times more growth, and that's there. And
Great.
it's due to exposure from different folks, talking to them, looking at different systems, the narrowing down my lens. In other words, like I was kind of, there was a time in the '90s and I was kind of lost. I was jumping around because I still haven't found what I was looking for. I mean, literally, So those years, why they weren't,
Right.
It wasn't. I mean, it's not like there wasn't a value in that search. It kind of molded me to where I am today and what I wanted, but nowhere to the streamline and the very, just focused and this tunnel vision and these last, 4 years of the podcast and really knowing what I want now and really diving into it deeply in there. So definitely a transformation, absolutely. But ironically, in my case, not a consistent growth incrementally. Some growth, but the biggest growth 2019 present day, and I'm kind of excited because I think it's just going to I'm going to further be able to dial in and refine. Like I am so immersed in refinement and being the best version of myself, refinement and giving the best version to my students, refinement being the best talk host, and I'm really able to do that and dial in there, whereas in the back then, no.
So here's an interesting question because I'll give you a little background. So in the late 90s, I was an editor for Tuttle Publishing, and Tuttle published a series of books on the Bruce Lee Library. John Little was the editor, but I was John's editor. And I went out to Iowa and went to the Linda Lee's home, and I got to look at all of Bruce Lee's cool stuff. It was like super awesome. And John and I were going through photos for his books, and he looked at me and said, "Why do you keep training?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, I think John was training with Ted Wong. I could be wrong, but I think that's who his teacher was." And he said, I asked myself, what's the point? What are we training for? We're not training for a competition. We're not really training for self-defense, because after a certain point you have self-defense. And if you're not a jerk, you're not getting in fights, right? And we're not training to get a new degree in something. So what is the purpose of training? And that got me thinking for a while. And, for me, it's just like, it's The Godfather. You're in, you can't get out. I mean, there's something about this art that just hooks you in. And you love it. So what is it for you? I mean, are you still training 25 years later because you don't want to get attacked on the street? Or are you training for what keeps you going?
Yeah, definitely not so much into self-defense. Like I'm pretty boring. Like I don't go to bars. My outings are like I'm going to get something to eat, or I'm getting takeout. So I don't live the most exciting life. So in other words, I'm not in settings where generally I would have to defend myself, God forbid. But I tell you so that's my outlook. However, though, seeing all the craziness on the news with these just random attacks, I will say when I do go out, I am a little more cautious and kind of 360 awareness more than I was pre-seeing what's going on in the world today. So while self-defense, I need to defend myself, is not number one. However, it's gone up in lieu of what's been going on, and particularly if I have my family members around. But really, what it is it's creativity. Like, it brings out creativity in me. Like,
Mm-hmm.
in other words, it keeps, everybody says, well, it keeps me sharp. Well, to me, it's beyond it keeps me sharp. It just keeps me vested. It keeps me interested. It keeps me motivated. It brings out, like, I don't feel like I'm stagnant. Like, without this, I probably would be like really depressed. You know what I mean? Matter of fact, I know I would be. So the aspect of self creativity and trying to be, again,
You'd be like Eeyore.
yeah, Eeyore, yeah.
Right.
But so definitely, like I alluded to before, the refinement aspect in conjunction with, right, creativity. Like, I try to be creative, like, not just from a personal lens of advancement, but creative, like, how can I be express this or teach this better to my students? Is there a better way? How can I convey my, the concepts or what I really want to elicit to them? How can I do this better? So that's what keeps me going. So there's a self aspect, of course, but then there's the aspect of me as an information giver, a translator, a vehicle for them. So all that combined is what really keeps me vested and going. And again, um, like before, like, I don't find myself, I'm never going to get bored or like, well, gee, I maxed out. Like, matter of fact, like, I don't ever foresee that happening, because, like, attribute development, speed, timing, position, non-tell, like, you can always work to be improving themselves. Well, guess what? You can always work better to improve on self stuff inside you. So to me, this journey is infinite.
It's given you a sense of self, and it's provided a way of life, basically.
Yeah.
You know. Um, yeah. So, what's next for Dean Franco? I've been hearing shudderings in the wind, or whatever the saying is, about FMA discussions, and what does the next future hold for Dean in podcasting and training? Are there other arts or teachers you want to pursue? Other things in life?
Yeah. So, okay. So, yeah, a couple things in the works. One, I definitely want to continue. I do enjoy the interviews and all that. I particularly have I must say, I'm enjoying more the theme episodes. So I'm going to definitely continue. However, I don't want to continue to the extent I've been doing the last 4 years. So I'm trying to get a couple folks that will pick up the slack. However, I want to be involved, just not to the magnitude I've been for the past 4 years. The other thing is,
Yeah.
so working on a project with somebody to kind of, I can't release the details, just out of fairness to the other gentleman. So that's coming. So that hopefully early fall will be released and folks will know. It's a very good thing,
Nice.
for everybody. Far as like personal journey within FMA, I'm really happy, like, what I'm doing and all that. Like, in other words, I'm reluctant right now to add or take on another system, because for fairness and integrity of the system, I want, when I take on something, I want to, I fully want to just immerse myself and dedicate myself. If I can't do that, I kind of hold back, because it's not fair to the instructor, it's not fair to the system, and that. So, not so much looking for other systems per se, but more dialing in on what I'm doing and refining. And there, if I did have the time and all that, yeah, I probably would look maybe at different systems. The other thing too is, I really find some of the other cultural arts fascinating, like in Latin America, like Estrema Criolla. Like, that's something I would like to do if I had time. But
Mm-hmm.
again, I just so reluctant to go take on something that I can't commit to. And there. And what else?
Yeah.
Fully committing myself to my students, there. So that's pretty much it. So a couple goals, more or less status quo. People have asked me, how long do you see FMA discussion going for? And it's a great question because one of the things I told myself since inception is that I would do this as long there was an interest and people were enjoying the content. The moment that folks don't, or there's a substantial drop in attendance or views, I'm not going to push this just because it's become an identity. That's the worst thing that I want. I don't want to keep doing this because I'm associated with it or it's as an identification. No. If it runs its
Right.
course, hey, I'm okay with that. I'm not going to be upset. It served its purpose for the however many months, years, and I would be absolutely 100% fine with that.
Yeah. That sounds great. Well, I want to thank you for coming on the Transformations Podcast, Dean. And I'm so thrilled to be able to talk to you more in depth about what makes you tick, because you're always talking about what's making other people tick. And you've done quite a bit in these last 4 years to promote and establish FMA, today's FMA, yesterday's FMA, giving voice to a very wide variety of people. And especially those theme shows are really, because you get so many opinions and not opinions, but details and information from different teachers within the same art. And I think what you're doing is great and amazing, and I thank you for it. And I was really thrilled to have you on today.
Again, H&H, humble and honored that, you would bring me on, Cinco Terro, you know what I mean? Number 5. Yeah, I mean,
Tarot, episode 5.
there's a plethora of people you could have asked before me. So I'm really humbled and honored to be on here with both of you. I'm a huge fan of both of you so couldn't think of a better way to spend a Sunday morning. So again, thank you to both of you.
Oh my gosh. Well, I hope you enjoy your Sunday. Thank you so much again, and I'll talk with you soon.
Absolutely. You guys take care. Thank you so much.